I'm Kelley Chunn. I'm a consultant. I have a consultancy based in the Boston neighborhood of Roxbury, Massachusetts. The name of my business is Kelley Chunn and Associates.
What do you guys do?
We provide culturally smart strategies to help you navigate social change. Particularly in this current political and social environment, we use the power of culturally sensitive messaging and civic engagement to help you connect to audiences wherever they might be.
Beautiful, thank you. Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel Glazer, president of Rachel G Events. I'm an event planning company. I do all types of events from private weddings, bar mitzvahs, anniversaries to corporate and nonprofit events. I'm based in Boston, but I do events all over Boston, New York, DC, nationally, as well as internationally. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Femi.
I'm from Foodlocker. Essentially, Foodlocker is a farm produce and consumer goods aggregator for large buyers. We support smallholder farmers across Africa to access big markets, either from large corporates, but also from large buyers who are like family buyers. We're based in Nigeria. Our team has over 20 people right now. Nice to join the group.
Hello, my friends. Thank you so very much for saying yes, taking time out of your day. I know you guys are all busy. Femi, what time is it right now?
It's 4:40. It's still quite early, actually.
Okay, so that's not bad. That's not bad. So I love this group because the global aspect of it, the whole entire international aspect of what you guys are doing, it's one of the things that I definitely want to touch base on. But I want to ask each one of you guys to talk about what was your year like? I mean, I spoke to each one of you guys. I mean, you guys were the first 15 people I spoke to back when the pandemic started really like the world was just now fully shut down. So last April at this time we were talking. What was your year like then, and how has it been throughout to this point where we are now, where the world is starting to open up? And we can start with Kelley.
My year was before the pandemic. I was very busy. During the pandemic, I became even busier, and I'm still busy. So in many respects, even though I had to pivot, I think everybody had to pivot somehow. In my case, it was to Zoom, but because of the nature of what I do, equity, diversity, inclusion, and we were in a year of racial reckoning, and many organizations were kind of having a come, to Jesus moment in terms of anti-racism and so forth. It was good timing in terms of the kinds of services I provide. And before the pandemic, I was involved with some projects that had a racial dimension.
Rachel, how was your year?
So my industry got hit really hard fast, and we're still recuperating, and I think we're going to be recuperating for a while. I was able to quickly pivot. Obviously, events were shut down quickly a year ago right now, March 12th, March 13th. I pivoted and I started doing lawn decor and lawn signs. The idea was, if we can't celebrate outside the house, let's bring celebrations to the house. So I did things for people at their house, and I continued that. So besides lawn signs and lawn decor, once the lockdown was lifted in May, I started doing events outside in tents of people's homes, and I'm still continuing that. So I was very lucky that I was able to pivot. And I learned every rule and regulation of COVID in terms of food, regulations, people, safety. I had to learn a lot along the way. I feel grateful I was able to stay alive. Obviously, I got hit very hard financially, but I was able to keep my brand alive. And I also, to keep my brand alive, I decided to give a lot of money back. So the proceeds of my sales of the lawn signs, which were birthday signs, thanking essential worker signs, Black Lives Matter signs. I did Father's Day signs, Mother's Day signs. I decided to give the money back to organizations such as the Massachusetts COVID Relief Fund, Beth Israel Deaconess, Equal Justice Initiative. I picked a couple nonprofits, the Needham Food Bank, and gave over $6,000 back of the proceeds of the lawn signs. And that really helped my business because I was able to keep the brand alive. I'm still today doing events and tents. I had one this past weekend. I have actually 4 bar mitzvahs this weekend coming up. I'm very excited about. So people are still doing it. We're just holding to the 25 allowed outside at private residence, 10 inside, and hopefully that will change. So I'm grateful, but I also feel very hopeful. My phone is ringing. People are asking for events in the fall. And more importantly, people are starting to book for 2022 and 2023. And I even got 2 calls for 2024. So I'm very hopeful.
Beautiful. Femi.
Well, I think the year started on a very good note. We were traveling and attending a number of startup competitions that Jodi is aware of. But then things slowed down a little bit after that when the lockdown started. But business-wise, we actually did a whole lot better than we expected. We grew by over 30% despite COVID-19. We increased the number of the people on our team. The product portfolio increased, which means we built more products. We launched faster. We actually accelerated the growth of our business model because essentially, somehow, while we were trying to develop the business, we sort of built some risk diversification strategies within the model itself. So when COVID struck, essentially, it struck a certain part of the business, but actually accelerated the growth of the other part. So which meant that we really didn't lose revenues. We actually did a whole lot better than we thought we were going to do. We won a number of awards, which was pretty good for us from the African Development Bank, but also from Thrive Agri-Food in the United States. We also won another award from another group, basically the Impulse Accelerator that you're aware of, won the Diamond Prize from that. Also, we got introductions to a number of investors. So it was a year of a lot of fear and uncertainty, but it actually validated our business model. It's actually prior to COVID-19, whenever we approached investors or we approached funders, they were always wondering why we built it to be that robust. They would always say, go and focus on one thing. And our perspective was that this is how we have to build this because we understand that there are cyclicalities in this business, etc. So it was actually a validation. COVID-19 was a validation of the model that we built.
I love that. And this is one of the things I loved about having the 3 of you guys on together is that your companies actually excelled. I mean, even though there were clear pain points, you found ways to excel. You found ways, but also people found you. To know that your phones are continually ringing is huge because so many people are talking about how for a lot of small businesses, they're dying because there's no way around the pandemic, and you guys found ways around it and found ways to be visible. Where do you believe each one of your industries are going to go now? The world is opening. People are starting to get vaccinated. People are starting where the travel restriction is still there, but people are the hopeful. Rachel, you said perfectly. I'm hopeful where lots of things are starting to open. Where do you see each one of your industries in the next couple of months? Because it's too easy for me to say in the next couple of years, but we honestly just don't know how this rollout of opening is going to happen. And just like the flu comes back every single year. COVID might come back every single year in a different way. So look, from everything you've learned in the past year, where do you see yourself and your company being in the next couple of months?
I can go if you want. So like I said before, I'm staying hopeful. I'm hoping we get to a situation where it's like the roaring 20s and people want to come out and party and celebrate after being inside and just with their family. So that's what I'm hoping for. So far, since the turn of the year and the vaccination rollout and hearing and seeing people vaccinated and just getting the pulse of my industry, I think it's going to happen. Do I think big events in 2021 are going to happen? No, but I think people are going to continue to have safe, fun events outside for a while, at least through the fall. But I do think by 2022, we're going to be back to semi-normal, meaning 200-300 people, maybe 400 people. the big conferences, the big galas, anything over 1,000. I'm not sure about that section of our industry, because now that you have the Zoom option, I think there's going to be less travel. I think there's going to be less need for major events when people can just watch it virtually. But in terms of my work, I have a couple of big events that are over 1,000, but the majority of my events are a couple hundred people, weddings, bar mitzvahs, nonprofit events. So I hope and I pray that it comes back, and I think it will. I think 2021 is still going to be on the line, but I do think by summer, like President Biden said, people are going to be celebrating July 4th. I'm getting a lot of calls now. I want to celebrate my husband's 50th. I want to celebrate my mom's 80th that we didn't do last year. Let's do something. So I think people crave the person to person celebrations. I see it happening. I'm hearing it happening. And I think we're just going to be always having to have that virtual option in our event industry now for people, whether it's a small event for family where certain family can't travel, or big events in a ballroom, you're always going to have that virtual option. So that's life changing for our industry, because we never really had that before, of a virtual option that brings in a lot of different questions and aspects to events. How much do you charge? How do you make it intimate for people who are still going to stay online virtually versus those who are in person? I have a corporate event, just to give you an example, and the benefit and the attraction of a corporate event is who's who, right? Who's in the room and who shows up. So that, I think, that's going to come back, and people are still going to want to show up, especially after being home for a year, because to be seen is important, especially in the corporate world. So I think it's all over the map, but I'm definitely hopeful. And like I said at the beginning, I hope it's back to the roaring 20s where people want to come out and have fun.
Rachel, before we jump on to somebody else, you travel a lot to Israel. Israel has been very much in the forefront of getting the vaccination. They've been in the forefront from a lot of things, where a lot of countries that cannot get access to the vaccination are depending on Israel and the technology and the innovation. But you also have a lot of charities that you do there. So how do you see going overseas? How's that? How do you see events going in a global way?
We should all learn from Israel. Israel did a couple smart things. One is they paid Pfizer double the amount to get the vaccines quicker. So Israel, for good or worse, knows how to respond to crisis based on being in war, based on, their situation in the Middle East. They know how to respond to crises. So they responded. The prime minister, for what he's worth, paid Pfizer double, got the vaccines, and every single person in Israel will have the opportunity to get the vaccine by the end of this month. Most of my friends in Israel, whether you're 18 or 80, have already been vaccinated. Life is opening up. It's amazing, amazing response. Granted, Israel's the size of New Jersey. So obviously in the United States, we have a bigger size challenge here, but they vaccinated everybody. People are already starting to go. I know people are starting to go next month back to Israel. Some of my clients were looking to plan fall things that would have been in the spring. We're looking maybe for the fall, whether my clients will go, I'll go there or they'll come here. But Israel's a good model because they put their people first and said, whatever it takes, we'll pay. We'll make it happen. But they also have the experience. So it's a very unique situation, but I think we can learn from it. I applaud President Biden for, the 12 weeks he's been in office has been life-changing, and people are getting vaccinated, and hopefully we all will be by May. But Israel's a very good example of how to get it done.
Beautiful. Kelley.
Well, for me, we're moving toward hybrid models. For example, being in the civic engagement, community outreach space, we're planning on the rededication of the monument on the Boston Common that inspired the movie Glory. It's the monument that pays tribute to Colonel Shaw and the 54th Regiment of Black soldiers. So there's a rededication planned for the fall, and we're having the planning committee are having a conversation about which portion of the event is going to be live, from the Boston Common, and which portion is going to be pre-recorded. How are we going to produce this safely, not really knowing, what the landscape is going to be like in September or October, even though, we're assuming that more people will be vaccinated. Hopefully the variants will not have, created more complexity around the whole vaccination piece. So to Rachel's point, events are kind of dicey, in terms of planning. And then, we conceive this rededication as a national event. So if we, for example, lightning strikes and, we invite Michelle Obama, and she's probably gonna send us a videotape, and so how do we incorporate that into the production? The same for General Colin Powell, who was here for a previous dedication of the monument. So what is going to be live, what's going to be taped. So having that discussion, and then on a hyper local side, the largely Black community of Roxbury, the Roxbury Cultural District, which has been a client and where I now serve on the board, we're planning something called Nubian Nights in honor of Nubian Square, which is part of the Roxbury Cultural District. It's essentially a music event, but here again, it's hybrid. So half of the event, the musical part of the event, which features Jazz Urbane, a jazz group, they'll be performing inside of a building, but the public will only be able to watch it projected on to the side of the building, and they'll hear the music from outside, which will also have to be managed because we're anticipating that this will happen later on in March and through maybe the middle of April. So that it's complicated. I mean, it's a lot more detail, COVID safety, all of those things have to be thought through with regard to events, as Rachel noted.
Kelley, in your industry, you're focusing on culture, and you were just like thrown into the Black Lives Matter. I mean, like it was one of those moments where we're riding the pandemic. I spoke to you, and then all of a sudden it was just bam. And so everyone started coming to you. Everyone needed to, again, as you mentioned, that the come to Jesus moment where how do we fix our company? Where do you see, okay, so many people are doing now, are they doing it for show? Are they doing it because it's genuine? Are they doing it where this is going to be part of our thumbprint, our footprint? How are you seeing companies evolving to make sure that they're having a well-functioning social, what's the word I'm looking for? You could say it probably better than me, but to have an organization that makes the most sense for all people in the community, as well as for the individuals that they're bringing in from other countries. How are you seeing people really being smart about, I'm just not articulating this right, but I hope you understand where I'm coming from, how are you working with companies, or how are you seeing companies evolve with what's happening right now in society?
Well, for me, the racial reckoning and its impact on corporate and nonprofit, both categories we serve, was a deepening, and it wasn't like suddenly getting hit. There were more queries. There were more, calls for help. There were a couple of crisis scenarios, but it really remains to be seen, to the extent to which this is deep, on both this is very heavy, deep, and some of it is psychological work, on the part of individuals who are having to confront their own implicit biases, as well as explicit biases. So the jury is still out, on how deeply companies and nonprofit and even government agencies want to go with anti-racism work, with racial reckoning. Some of the clients that I've been working with, for example, one of our clients, Wayside, is creating an equity training center. They want to create an anti-racist industry. They deal a lot on the nonprofit side with social work and so forth, clinical help, and they've done a lot of the work internally already. It's evolving. We never really get there. We're all on a journey, but they've done a lot of the internal work with their staff for over the past 10 years or so. And now they're jumping out there with their own equity training center. Others are doing, I'm part of a cohort that's dealing with the racial equity lens. You know, are you an advocate? Are you an ally? Are you an accomplice? You know, where are you, you know, on that spectrum? And where's your sweet spot? You know, not everybody is going to get out in the street, you know, with a sign. Some people would rather operate from the corporate boardroom and ask the hard questions. You know, how many board members do you have? How many people of color are on your board? How many people of color are in your C-suite? You know, are you retaining your staff of color? Why are they leaving? If they are leaving, why are they staying? You know, ask, who are your vendors? What is your procurement, you know, in terms of women and people of color? What does all that look like? So from wherever you're positioned, you know, nonprofit, corporate, if you're an advocate or an ally, there's some, I think, some deep internal work that we have to do. And then how do we make an impact in our own organizations? The jury's still out.
Thank you. Femi.
Well, I have a question do you feel like the movement, in terms of the last couple of months, I don't mean die down's not the right word, but the intensity, or is that just based, I haven't seen as much in the media, or where are you at today compared to?
Well, there was some pushback on the Black Lives Matter movement, if that's what you're referring to, Rachel, over the summer, because depending on where you lived and what kind of coverage you got across the country, you might have seen more peaceful demonstrations in your geographic area, or you may have seen the kind of the fringe group that was, you know, engaged in violence or looting. So in response to some of that coverage, whether positive or negative, a lot of the negative coverage generated some pushback on the Black Lives Matter movement. The Black Lives Matter movement is multi-pronged. It's all across, at this point, I think it's global. You know, it's a global movement, and they are very much in the planning stages. I think that they're working with some of the government entities on policy. So even though they may not be as visible, the movement is still very much alive and working.
Yeah, that was my question more based on, I don't feel as intense sitting here March 15th as it was, say, October or November 15th. So I just worry some of these things. Yeah, good. I'm glad to hear, because I feel like sometimes these things come and go, but I'm glad to hear that it's still going. I was really interested.
The movement is still moving.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that. It was interesting because when I wanted to give the money back to Black Lives Matter, I had a hard time finding, there's no Black Lives Matter organization per se, right? Like when I looked it up.
Well, they do have a website. I don't know if you Googled, but they do have a website.
I did, but I was encouraged to give to an organization that works for Black Lives Matter. So that's why I gave money to Equal Justice Initiative. I really liked what they stood for and the work that they were doing for Black Lives Matter. But in terms of, you can't just write a check to Black Lives. I was told you can't just write a check to Black Lives Matter. I was told to make a donation to an organization. Right. So that's why I chose Equal Justice Initiative. But it was just interesting to me when I was trying to figure out where to give some money. But I'm glad to hear it's still going.
Yeah,
because it's obviously still very needed.
I don't know what you found online, but there is a website. They do outline a lot of the work that they're doing across the country. And I have gotten several requests to donate because now
I know who to call.
Yeah.
This is a good, I would say Kelley is a great resource, which is fantastic. All right, so wait, let's just, before we get into more group discussion, because we will, Femi, let's talk about how the year was for you, what changed, but where do you see your industry going forward?
So I think the food industry, especially within Africa, evolved from sort of reacting to, at least the thought process is now about preparing ahead against the next big shock. It might not be, a pandemic. It might just be some political uprising or some kind of disruption to the local supply chains that exist. I think there's more awareness now, especially in places like Nigeria, Kenya, etc., about the need to take to make food production more scientific. So currently we have at least over 250 million smallholder farmers who produce using, crude implements, no science involved, no understanding of soil water content or soil compositions or anything scientific to ensure that they have some predictability to their outcomes. Now the thought processes are changing. Now the sort of agri-tech companies are coming up and, coming up with interesting solutions to help, boost the productivity of, the local farmers that exist here. I think that the perspective is also changing from the perspective of Africa as an importer of food from, the United States, Brazil, etc., more to how do we start producing our own food? Because if another shock happens, global supply chains will be disrupted and we might have no food to eat. And it's actually also very fitting because there's a large number of young people. There's a lot of land. We have over 60% of the arable land, and all these opportunities are essentially coming together to, to reposition how we view food production. In addition, I think that there's more awareness now from the young people that we have to take things into our hands because essentially, if we don't, things would not improve. I think Africa is getting on the map now. At least yesterday, we had about 3 Nigerians winning the Grammy Awards for the first time, pretty much local indigenous Nigerians. So it's an exciting time to be in Africa right now. But it's also a time for reflection and challenge and for people to get on and hold to use science, to use technology, to see how we can build linkages with, for example, places in the United States, in California or Iowa, etc., where they already have expertise in production of food. How do we connect those places to our own local producers? So I think it's an interesting time for the industry, but it's also a challenging time because now we have to rethink almost everything.
I mean, I would definitely, I love what you just said, and I love what you're doing. One of the things that everyone is, during the pandemic, it was the forefront of how globally there are millions of people that were not able to get food resources. People that are living paycheck to paycheck, not able to get the simple little staples to provide for their family. You clearly saw lines in Texas where people were in their cars at food banks. These are things that people were saying at the time when they were taking pictures of these individuals in the United States. They're like, I go, this shouldn't happen in the United States. This is what happens in Africa. This is what happens in West Indies. I go, and I'm sure you've heard that before. I mean, we've all heard it. And to use it as an example, what was your take when you're seeing in the United States where it's, land of opportunity, and you're seeing there's like a massive food shortage here, and how is it being perceived in Africa, and what are you guys doing that's different to actually make it better, where we are able to provide, but we are able to grow our own food? And so how is it what's the learning lesson on both sides?
I think there's a law, I think they call it the Murphy's Law, that says if anything can go wrong, it will go wrong at some point. I think that historically, Africa had been at the receiving end of things always going wrong. So either because of a leadership crisis or because we didn't prepare well enough or because the system was just not built for resilience or to be robust enough to respond in cases of big shocks, right? I think what we saw from afar, at least I think it was recently with the whole power cuts in Texas or something like that. I think some of the things we've come to see are that first, some of these issues are not isolated. They are not peculiar to any particular geography. Big shocks and maybe unfortunate situations with systems not built properly could actually jeopardize a lot of people's lives. It could ruin people's lives. So I think we learned a few things because, we've always been in crisis mode, right? Like, if we didn't have electricity issues, especially in places like Nigeria, you'll probably have issues with food prices just flying up and down and nobody has control, supply chains being disrupted every now and then. We had Ebola much earlier. So I think those situations, I would say, prepared us a little bit to be a bit more conservative. And I'm not saying this as a good thing, actually. I'm just saying it as because, and I think maybe it was Rachel that spoke about Israel being because of the kind of experiences they've had with, their neighbors and the wars, etc. They've sort of built certain resiliences. In Africa, I don't think we've built those actually, but I think because of the experiences we've had, people have learned to live a bit leaner. They've learned to live within some level of discomfort. So while the rest of the world was essentially complaining about not being able to move around, not being able to talk to their friends, we were pretty okay. Maybe also because the number of flights coming into Africa was not that much, which meant the migration of the virus was not as fast. But at the same time, people were already understood the essence of community. You don't necessarily have to be isolated. You can, lean on people and depend on family once in a while. I think we survived a little bit, but I think we have to then evolve into a proper society where we are planning ahead. We're providing food banks, where we have food storage systems. We have ready access to production, such that when the next shock comes, we're ready. I don't think every African country is. I don't think my country, Nigeria, is. But I think it's something we should, take very seriously now.
Asking everyone, I mean, and I think that's one of the things that you just hit is about the communities. The three of you are from three different clear communities. And so how does the community come together? I mean, the Black community, the African community, the Jewish community, how does the community come together to actually get us to a point where we are thriving from this situation versus pulling back and saying, oh, you know what? I'm just waiting. I'm panicking. I'm afraid. I don't want to go any further. So how are we going to move forward? How do you see your communities moving forward? And how do you see society overall moving forward, locally in your communities, but also globally?
Well, I don't really think we can move forward until we have COVID under control, and until we have a better handle on the vaccinations, which are trending up. Although if you were going to look at communities of color, the Black and Latinx populations here in Boston and in Massachusetts, the rate of vaccination is much out of proportion to our population numbers in terms of the Black and brown communities. So that is an issue. Access, aside from whatever skepticism or trust issues or hesitancy issues there might be about getting the vaccine, access is an issue. So, I mean, that's a major hurdle. And then there is an economic recovery, which all three of us have alluded to. And what does that mean in terms of, say, for example, businesses that are owned by women or businesses, particularly small businesses that are owned by Black and brown people? What is economic recovery going to look like for those demographics? And there are some issues around business disparity. One of the projects that I worked on pre-pandemic was a business disparity study for the city of Boston. And it was released, I think it was back in February. So there are some issues that really need to be dealt with. Hopefully the Biden recovery bill, the COVID Act relief bill will help to facilitate our coming together, recovery, vaccination, and equity. But we have a ways to go. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel, but it's a long tunnel.
It's a long tunnel.
In terms of, well, I already spoke about the event community, but the Jewish community, we're very focused on helping others, Jewish and non-Jewish. TJP, the Combined Jewish Philanthropies, which is the Jewish Federation, spent a lot of time raising money to help others. I think my biggest worry is actually people gathering and going back to synagogue and praying. I don't know for the other communities on this call, but people have just been doing Zooms online. So the synagogues, our place of worship in the Jewish community are suffering because people are like, why am I going to pay X amount of money to be a temple member when I can just Zoom in? I know for our family, not paying all this money to join a synagogue and not stepping one foot into the synagogue for the whole year is challenging. So that's on the religious side. On the cultural side, I think, everyone has the holidays. Well, not everyone. A lot of people on this call have the holidays of Passover and Easter coming up again. And so, we're planning outside gatherings for our Passover Seders with friends and family, still outside because not everyone's vaccinated. But I'm concerned a little bit also because our community is very based on events. Jodi knows she comes to a lot of our Jewish events. Are people going to feel comfortable gathering, coming to events? I hope so, like I said at the beginning, but I worry a little bit. I mean, we'll see what happens, but we're resilient, just like Black Lives Matters and the other communities here, and we'll build back up. And in terms of Israel, our Jewish state over there in the Middle East, like I said before, they're in a good position. They just really need people and tourists to come back because they thrive on that. That's their biggest source of income is tourism, and that's obviously been hit really hard. So hopefully by the end of the year into 2020, people will feel comfortable traveling again. I think a lot. I mean, there's a whole segment on the news the other night about post-pandemic vacations. And I see it. I talk to my travel agent. People are booking.
I already have 3 places on my list that I want to go.
Well, you're always on the move, girl. You're always on the, not worried about you. You'll walk or swim or run there, even if you can't fly. Jodi gets there somehow. But yeah, I think people are going to hopefully start traveling because that will really help Israel. That will help our economy here in the States too. When people start to travel, and I think they're going to. I think people are going to go visit their families. I know for my parents, my brother's in LA. He has a 2-year-old they haven't seen in a year and a half. So they're getting on a plane because they're fully vaccinated now. So it's picking up. I actually, on a side note, I'm very excited. Jodi will appreciate this. I got a call from a couple who just got engaged. They met on a site during Corona called Corona Crush. Yes, you'll love this, Jodi. They met on a site called Corona Crush. They had a Zoom relationship for a couple months. The guy who lives in New York, the girl actually happened to also live in New York, but during COVID, she decided to move home to Knoxville, Tennessee, because her management consulting job in New York, obviously they weren't going to the office and she didn't want to live in a studio apartment in New York. So she went home to Knoxville, Tennessee. They met on Corona Crush. They had a relationship. On Zoom. He drove to Knoxville, Tennessee to meet her and fell in love, and they hired me to do their wedding. So I'm actually going to Knoxville, Tennessee in May to do their wedding. Yeah.
Wonderful.
The funny thing is, because you're locked down at home, you're constantly communicating. And so the relationships, from what I've heard, are so more intense, like writing a letter to someone. So it's been really like interesting where I've heard a few people where they've met their love of their lives because it was like old school writing letters, seeing each other, talking on the phone. It wasn't just like at a bar, like, do I like you?
That's right. They had a lot of time. Right. So there's hope, so it's interesting. So I'm going to Knoxville, Tennessee, where I've never been. It's in the mountains. Everything's outside. But obviously, unlike Massachusetts, Jodi knows well, the South is very different in terms of COVID. They're having 60 people, which will be fine. I mean, in Massachusetts next week, we're up to 100.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure how many people are wearing. I mean, I'm fully vaccinated, so I'm okay. But I don't know how many people are going to be wearing masks or what the situation will be. But there's a silver lining of COVID there. A nice story. And I never would have got that wedding. It's interesting. I met the guy in Israel. He's a film producer, and I met him at someone's Shabbat table 2 years ago, and we stayed in touch. And then I saw that he got engaged. So I wrote to him. I was like, congratulations. He's like, oh, you're an event planner. Do you want to do my wedding? I'm like, yes, I do. And that's how it happens.
See, this is where we're reconnecting with people. This is good. Femi, how is it? How is it? You're representing the globe right now. You're in Africa. So how is it there? And where do you see, what happens next for you?
I think our communities, they didn't really lock down, right? We had a very short lockdown period, and sort of activity slowed for some time.
And he's frozen.
Come back, Femi, come back. Well, I think I may have told you, Jodi, I lived in Nigeria probably before Femi was born. I mean, this is going back in the 80s. I lived there for a year and a half.
All right,
I may-
so as we wait for Femi to come back, as he's frozen in time, what were you there for work, or were you there for just?
I was there for work. I worked for the Nigerian Television Authority. And so we went all over the country. We were primarily based in Lagos, you know, as you know, the capital, but
Yep.
you know, we went to we went to all the major cities wherever there was a TV station, and all the way up to the north to Jos, which unfortunately is where a lot of the Boko Haram activity is right now. But he's right. It's a very entrepreneurial culture, the market. They have a very dynamic film and TV industry, Nollywood, they call it.
Yeah.
So they're at fashion, literature. I mean, I from what I can see on, you know, this side of the world, I think that there's a renaissance going on in Nigeria. I'd be interested though to hear from Femi to see to what extent they had to pivot. You know, he said that they didn't stay shut down for very long. So I would imagine that they probably kept right on rolling.
Femi, while you were gone, Kelley lived in Nigeria for 1.5 years, so she was filling us in. So go ahead. It's your time.
Yeah. I think
But not lately, Femi. It's not yet. Yeah.
I think I heard a bit of that. So it's my network here. Sometimes 4G goes to 3G without you knowing, and everything just messes up. So I mean, I think you're right? There's a proper renaissance going on in Nigeria. I think there's a new generation of young people coming out to challenge the status quo of what has, you know, essentially brought the giant of Africa to become the snail of Africa, or the ant of Africa. I think the potentials are there. The market is big. We've got more than 200 million people. Almost everything you look at is big, but there are challenges and there are issues. There was a huge protest during COVID, which actually was the sort of the catalyst that caused the stoppage of the lockdowns. Essentially, a lot of young people were idle and they were reflecting more about their lives, and you know, they thought about how difficult their situations were because people were not working. There was no palliative or anything being distributed, so there was no opportunity for people to feed their families. And there was this huge breakout of a protest they called the End SARS protest, which was essentially the young people kicking against the autocratic, the oppressive police system that exists in Nigeria. People were out there to say none of this anymore. Unfortunately, it ended up in some people getting killed. The Nigerian military actually went out on the streets and shot people. So but there's a new reawakening. People are thinking more about the politics of 2023. So in 2023, we're going to have to elect another president. And people are thinking about these things more. I think young people are more aware of their situation. They're thinking about, how can I contribute? How can I, you know, join a group? How can we support things? There are a lot of challenges already. We have a huge problem with kidnapping now. A bunch of people will just go out there, kidnap a bunch of students, and demand ransom from the government. So there's a lot of, you know, sad stories, but there are also some very beautiful stories, which are about young people actually, you know, against all odds, you know, the likes of Burna Boy, Wizkid,
Yes.
you know, we're super excited about that right now. So it's a great time to be here in Nigeria, but it's also a challenging time. Our communities are responding, people are responding, but the response is not as fast as what we would expect. So which means we need more movement, we need more young people, you know, bonding together and supporting causes until they get results, you know.
I have to say that this is one of the reasons why I wanted to bring people back, but bring people back in groups. You guys are not just doing wonderful things and amazing things for yourself, as in your own businesses and your services, but on a global aspect, each one of you guys are doing so much for your communities on a larger level. And so that's one of the things where small businesses have larger voices. And I think that people forget that, where you guys are in it every single day. You're not just reading about it, you're living it. And so this is just another way of people understanding who you are, what you do, how you do it, and who you're doing it for, and how you're responding to what's out there which is very, very important. So I thank you very much for that. And then of course I have now it's time for my last question, because you guys added so much. Again, you always add more knowledge, lots of nuggets, but the best part is I could sat here and Rachel and Kelley had their conversation, then Kelley and Femi had their conversation. I'm like, I love this, because I'm just gonna come in and just press record and let you guys go next time, which will be great. But I'm gonna ask you guys the last question, which is my favorite question, is if you had a personal ask and a professional ask of anyone that's listening right now, what would be your personal ask and what would be your professional ask? And since we had the ladies going first, Femi, I'm gonna have you go first on this time. I know you're like, darn it, no.
That's unfair.
Oh, look, he froze on purpose.
Yeah.
So back.
Yep, Femi's back. Okay, go ahead, Femi.
I hope I'm back. Yeah, I guess the
You're
network
back.
wanted to bail me out. A professional ask is, I think that the investor community has to be open to new ideas and new ways of viewing things, right? A situation where, and I think this is changing a lot in the United States, where you now have diversity of investor types, diversity on the boards, on the investment committees, etc. A situation where people have a certain view about the world, and that is the only view they want to invest in. A situation where people believe that only certain people from certain backgrounds have the capacity to run businesses or to build them. I think this has to change. Luckily, we are seeing a lot of that in Africa now with Florida Wave and Paystack. These are two popular companies in Nigeria that one of them became a unicorn just this last week. And we're seeing some of those trends. And I hope that the investor community opens up a whole lot more to see Africa for what it is, and the fact that solutions that probably worked elsewhere might not be fully deployable here. You might need to customize, people might need to reinvent business models just to make sure that they are compliant with the kind of struggles we have here. Personal ask, I don't know, maybe a free trip somewhere.
I love it.
Yeah, I mean, that was a joke actually, but I think a personal ask is, I think that here in especially when you live in places like Africa or Nigeria, where things can be a bit more chaotic than in other parts of the world, you want to be able to open up to the rest of the world. You want to be able to move out. I really wish that the embassies, the foreign embassies who are around here, open up a lot more so that people can apply for visas, not just because they want to migrate. People like me, I had the opportunity of going abroad, studying abroad, and I decided I was going to come back to Nigeria. But people need to be able to see sanity for them to be able to build sanity. If you've never seen it, you've never seen a driverless train system work, you've never seen a sane economy, you've never seen free markets, you probably cannot build it. You probably cannot imagine it. So meaning those embassies opening up for at least credible people whose profiles they can, do a proper research to find out, are these people going to come back to their countries or not? I think this is going to be useful for us to evolve our countries and to evolve our economies.
Beautiful, thank you. Kelley or Rachel, who wants to go next?
I'll go next. I would say my professional ask is for nonprofit organizations and corporations to walk the talk about anti-racism and really look at their policies, their procedures. Again, are you contracting with vendors who are women-owned or owned by people of color? Who is on your board? How inclusive, how diverse? Are you looking at your company through a racial equity lens? That would be my professional ask. And my personal ask is very selfish. I would like to connect with Rachel and Femi after the call. I have some follow-up questions.
Brilliant, that'll be
Awesome, love it.
Pivoting and Nigeria. Wow.
I love it.
Wow.
I love it. I was going to say the same thing. I like to be connected and get each other's emails and phone numbers, and maybe we can have a call. to figure out how we can help each other. This has been a silver lining for, sorry, I don't know if you were done, but
Yeah, I am. Go ahead.
this has definitely been a silver lining. And thanks to Jodi, there's been time to connect with people that I really wouldn't have had time or even known to connect with. So it's been such a big silver lining for me, the networking aspect of the pandemic. It's been great too. And it's been laid back. I mean, I wish we could meet in person, but there's something to be said to be able to connect.
So Rachel, what's your personal and your professional?
Especially with you. They're kind of intertwined. Let's party. Let's celebrate.
Let's get out there.
They're totally intertwined.
Safely.
So if you know of anybody, I want to help people celebrate. For those who are still comfortable at home, we'll do it at home. For those who want to do it in a venue, anything from small to big. So my personal and professional asks are the same. But I will say, and Jodi knows, and Jodi's part of this community too, I've also been helping people. I'm a big runner, and I've also been helping people during the pandemic who've called me and say, how do I start? So I've been helping people do that. I'm going to be a coach for Girls on the Run this spring, which I'm very excited about. So I've also just on the side, just been helping people kind of get off the couch and get out there. So if anyone knows of anyone who needs help with that, I'm happy to advise on that as well.
Have you ever run the marathon?
Yes, many. I've run.
I knew you were gonna say yes,
yes.
Rachel.
I've
Rachel,
run
how many marathons have you run now?
19, and seven Boston. Not as fast as your people, Femi, for sure, but I'm getting there. I'm working on it. I'm gonna catch up to you. So yeah, I'm waiting to see what's gonna happen with this year. I did last year's virtually. I had it actually was a great experience. The pressure was off. I ran the course. I had a great time. I ran for Boston Children's Hospital. I run all the time. I'm hoping Boston happens. I mean, it's going to happen. It's just a question of how big the field will be. So yeah, I've run a bunch. I'm actually running an in-person half in 2 weeks in New Hampshire. So I'm excited about that.
Rachel, you know what? It's one of those things that I forget, but I'm going to probably have to like tap into because I put off Chicago. So I got into Chicago marathon and I put it off. So I'm not going to do it till next year, 2022. And right now I have a tire. And so
We'll talk.
Literally, I went for a run.
Don't we all?
Yeah, I know. I went for a run the other day. I mean, and I go for like 1 or 2 miles now, but I'm like, okay, how am I going to get back to 26? I mean, before 26.2 in my mind, just never thought about it. But now I'm like, okay, there's a little part.
We'll get there. It's all mental. 80% of everything we do, especially running, is mental.
I definitely know I can finish a marathon, but like right now, I'm like, I just need to do it in a healthy way. So I may tap into you. And
yes, let's have a call. I'll help you.
Yeah, just to see you.
Right now, it's about just getting out.
I would come to your area and I would like just run, like literally just anything you could do because I need to mentally get back into it. And so you might be happy.
Yeah, let's talk. I'm happy. I have a lot of strategies to get you back out there.
Not
today.
I tell you,
Today's too cold.
She posts today's ridiculously cold. Femi will never experience this. No, when Femi and I met each other. So Femi and I met each other in Morocco last year. Kelley and I have known each other since I was in radio for years ago. And Rachel, how did we meet?
I think we eventually, first through Mass Challenge, I think.
Okay, through Mass.
You were the photographer at my events.
Yeah, so there you go. So so again, I will always bring you guys together. There's always some different conversations. I don't prepare. People always ask, how much preparation do you do for these calls? I do zero preparation because you guys are constantly fueling me with content that I can ask questions as I go. So Lily, thank you so very much for taking the time. I really, really, really appreciate it. And again, this is never going to be the last one. Sometimes I go, the next conversation might just be with people that are in your industry, but I just wanted to start the conversation as in saying thank you and making sure that you guys were alive and well a year later.
Thank you, Jodi. This was amazing.
Jodi.
Thank you, Kelley and Femi. It's an honor to meet you guys.
Thank you guys.
Thank you for taking. Jodi, will you give us each other's contacts?
Yes, I will sit there and connect you guys afterwards. Yeah, I'll sit there and just send a group email.
Thank you. This was so beneficial. I really appreciate it. Jodi, thanks so much.
Beautiful, guys. Thank you.
You're the best. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.